Hi, my name is Simon Snouter. This is the podcast with Kirsten Westholter. I'm so glad that I have her here as a guest. She is the head of strategic consulting at Predixa. Kirsten, welcome.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you for the invitation to be here.
Well, I'm so excited because you have a great background and we're going to talk about your expertise in more details during this podcast. But first, I want to know more about Kirsten and the audience as well. Like, how did you end up in Dubai? How was a little bit about your life story? Tell me more.
Well, I'll try to keep it short. So I'm originally also from the Netherlands, born and raised in the Netherlands. My mom was American, my father Dutch. When I was 17, I moved to Amsterdam to study. And I think I stayed about 26 years in Amsterdam and in the end did move to Dubai. But a lot of things happened in between. Mm-hmm. So without going into a long story, at one moment I did have an assignment in Germany during the weekdays. I worked for Adidas for 3 years as an external consultant. That was already very exciting, and also to see some things from other countries. I was already used to work in an international environment, in banking environments like ABN AMRO, yeah. Royal Bank of Scotland. And after those 3 years with Adidas, I got an opportunity to go to Dubai and work with Home Center in a supply chain improvement project. So again, change management and a bit of business transformation. After a year, we lost our assignment. So that was with a previous employer. Came back to the Netherlands and I had something like, I don't want to be here. Mm-hmm. I really don't want to be here. And I was also looking at my life, both personal and business life. And I really had something like, I'm bored, and is this it? Decided to go back to Dubai and see what I could do there. Luckily, I bumped into a very old contact of mine, actually a Dutch guy, again, somebody I used to work with when I was working with ABN AMRO. And he was working in a fintech banking company. And almost immediately he offered me a job. So wow. I did say yes to that. So quickly I returned to Dubai. That was in 2016. Worked for about 2 years for the fintech. Started my own consulting company after that for about 2 years as well. And since early last year, I'm actually a co-founder of Predixa.
That's amazing. I mean, you just came to Dubai with no agenda in terms of like you didn't know where you would work, and then you actually find a job. How cool is that?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think things happen for a reason like that. Yeah. And it was not even the best fit, that first job here. Yeah. But you need to start something again and somewhere.
Yeah. And also start to feel how it is to work here if it's a little bit different than Europe. Well, you did that as well in the previous assignments, I think, with Home Center.
Yeah, exactly. Because you do learn to work with different cultures. Yeah. And the stupid thing is, like, I always thought I was very flexible and adaptive when I was working in the Netherlands, up till the moment that I came here. And I think now I can properly say, like, I adapt, and much better than I did in like years ago.
Maybe because what is adaptive and flexible in the Netherlands and Europe is a different standard than what it is here.
Maybe. And it's, I think, also to always keep an open mind and to learn from other cultures. And often here you are, in a sense, a minority. And as long as you're open to learn, it's great.
Great. So you talked about your consulting past, and I want to know more about, like, how did you enroll in it, your first job, and how did you realize that you're good at it? Because you're clearly good at it. People can look your background up as well if they want. But how did you get a feeling for it, and how did you experience your first start in the industry?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So when after graduation, I actually first worked with a market research firm for about a year. And then after that, I joined a big IT firm in the Netherlands, and actually they're a daughter of Capgemini. And I don't know if you know, but what usually happens if you don't have the IT background as a trainee, you start as a software tester.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Okay. So back in the days, that happened like that. So I think I did that for almost a year, and then also gained some experience in leading teams already. And I had something like, this is actually not what I want to. It's good to understand some things and also to understand parts of the IT world and also of people working in these firms. But I wanted to do something different. And I got an opportunity to actually join their business process improvement division. It's a smaller division compared to all the other things they were doing. And there I actually started, not immediately, of course, working as a consultant, more as an analyst. And then slowly you grow as a business process improvement consultant, so working with continuous improvement projects, and later on bigger projects like a business transformation consultant, and sometimes in completely different roles. And I learned that that is actually my passion, helping companies to incrementally improve and also to have them do it. So I do like to provide advice, but usually it is also good to be there and help them implement it. But these people need to be the ones who are really implementing it, because as a consultant, I think a very important thing is that you need to teach people how to do it themselves, because otherwise they will keep needing you, which has never been my objective, because you also want to move on to other companies. And going back to your question about like being good at consultancy, I think I have the right people skills and analytical skills to do consulting. And what I mean by that is also asking a lot of questions when I work with companies, and also trying to find out what the real root causes are of issues, and helping, again, people to find those root causes. And of course, often when you work as an external consultant, you don't have all that, call it in-depth knowledge yourself about, for instance, banking or retail, etc. You do have your experience in improvement or in business transformations, change management. But that's why I always would like to work with people with the proper knowledge in the companies, and you just ask them a lot.
Yeah, and I think it also might brighten your own horizon, right? Because you work with so many different industries, companies, and then you learn also, beside of giving them something to learn about, you're also receiving information.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also why I always liked to be part of a consulting organization, because you're not stuck in one topic or one sector, etc. And of course, you do see certain sectors that are more interesting than others. I did always like the retail one, communications, banking as well. I was usually a little bit less fond of government, but I can only talk about government way back in the Netherlands, for instance, or city governmental bodies. And what I always like as well is to see how people adapt in these organizations, and also if they understand, I call it the thinking without a box. And actually, because why would you even think about still having a box? People often say, try to think outside the box, but why do you need that box at all? So it's a bit design thinking methodology.
Well, that's a nice one. I've not heard about that one before. Then you even can go further.
Exactly. And that's also what I think is beneficial as an external person. You don't even have to be a consultant, but just someone outside the sector that you're looking at. You often come with very fresh ideas. Often, you get the pushback that people say, no, that it doesn't work like that in our sector. But you can trigger them with certain questions, certain ideas, that they come up with their proper ideas themselves.
Yeah. And maybe because, when you're in a work process and you're just used to doing things the way they are and not necessarily questioning all the time. Can we do it differently?
Exactly, no, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's also a little bit learning, I would say, how to innovate as well.
Talking about innovation, your company has launched a new campaign. Can you tell us more about this?
Of course, maybe also first, I don't know if people know what Predixa is doing. So Predixa is actually a sustainable growth strategy advisory. And what we do help business leaders, usually in mid-sized and larger companies, to obtain sustainable growth, which is of course very important in these challenging economic times. And the way we do it is different compared to a lot of other advisory services. So we use artificial intelligence to gather, or we gather data, and we are able to analyze this data. So a lot of internal data, but also external data. We are analyzing that very, very quickly and are able to come up with the results and an action plan plus support in what people need to do very, very fast and definitely compared to the traditional consulting. So coming back to your question about what our campaign is, we are very much focused on business resilience right now. So that has to do, of course, with these challenging economic times. And we are offering these business leaders the support that they would require or would hopefully need to weather the storm. And if we talk about business resilience, we talk about a lot of different aspects. And yes, we do talk about workforce, about potentially business culture, diversity, equity and inclusion, your talent acquisition, retention, but also leadership and how different aspects in the company are going.
Okay, I think a lot of companies do want to do something about sustainability. I mean, they talk about it a lot, but there's still a big road towards achieving the things that a lot of companies are saying. And I also think more of a pushback now from the people in general that they want to see more sustainability in companies.
Yes, and that is also an aspect that we are looking at. But if I say we are like really focused on sustainable growth, it's not so much like sustainability goals, which are important as well, of course, because we all know, a lot of people know the SDGs and also all the objectives that are required prior to 2030, and there's still a long road to go. But if I'm talking, for instance, about sustainable growth, it's indeed like growth in the long term.
Okay.
And if we talk about indeed sustainability, there are a lot of other aspects you look at.
So to achieve sustainable growth in a company, how does your company fit in with that, and how does Predixa come in then as a company to help to make that happen?
What we do is we always listen to the challenges, objectives and issues a company has, because no advice should be the same, of course, and it all depends on all these elements, which direction they should be heading. So that is usually in one of the first conversations that we find out what's happening inside the company. We actually park that a little bit. So it's not that we input that in our artificial intelligence, but what we do is we gather a lot of data in the company, and we look at data from employees, and it's all anonymously gathered. And we also look at external data from, for instance, investors, partners, and also the customers of our clients, and combine it with some harder data, and these are the KPIs within an organization, and these are all relative data. So we're not asking for absolute, for instance, growth figures, but it's all relative compared to the previous period. And by means of our advanced artificial intelligence diagnostics, we're able to combine a lot of multiple data points really across the entire organization, and come up with an action plan, but also, yes, definitely advice and hands-on advice in how these business leaders can change things.
And how do you, can you give some example of some companies that went through this process and where they were initially and then afterwards where they ended up with by using your expertise?
Yeah, an example. I can't mention the name
No
now,
no
but
names, but just like
yeah.
to give an idea, also for people that are not very familiar with the processes.
Yes, no,
Yeah.
of course. No, so we have been working with a company who they clearly had some issues around their staff. They saw people leaving, didn't fully understand what was going on. And we were actually focused on gathering, of course, the relevant data. There was a new head of HR in place, and she really wanted to know what's going on. And also another aspect was that the sales were dropping. So by gathering a lot of information, we did find out, for instance, also with sales, that certain procedures were not clear. And also certain information was not published on the website or not shared amongst each other. So for that team, it was very hard actually to make their sales as well. And with regards to the staff or to the human aspect, there was a lot of things going on culture-wise. What was, for instance, the thing is that leadership thought they were very open and they had a very open business culture. And they always told people like the door is always open. But if you don't really show that behavior, even if you tell people, but it still is kind of threshold to get in, it's not an open culture.
Yeah, I see. So there was a retention problem and a sales problem. And after this got highlighted specifically, it's very good, by the way, that you went after the people that left to ask them for feedback, because a lot of people don't do that as well, to ask also people, why did you leave?
Well, it was not so much, no. It was not so much the leaving people in general. It's gathering the information from the employees.
Okay. Yes, yeah. From the employees as well that left as well?
No, it's the current employees.
Okay, the current employees, the different stakeholders, and all of that showed that there was this problem, which was clearly not highlighted yet. And then after it got highlighted, was there a positive change in the company?
We still have to see certain things because like it also depends on the pace of a certain company, how fast you need to do it again, actually. And we advise to do this exercise, I would say, usually once every 6 months, and then you would really need to see a certain improvement as well, depending on the actions you take.
Yeah, it's very good that that companies are willing to take that step, to bring in an expert to say we are struggling with something. Can you please find out why this is happening? Because I've seen firsthand with companies that I work with that I warned them about certain things and they later happened, and it's not like you want to say I told you so.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just you regret it.
Yes.
Because it could have been avoided, but the willingness to get it highlighted is not always there.
True, and sometimes they also don't see it, and then we're talking about root cause analysis again. So on the surface, it can look like a certain issue, and only if you dig deeper and if you're able to connect, I would say, a lot of also data points, inputs with each other, because a lot of things are interrelated. And traditional consultancy, you wouldn't detect that. And you would also potentially be very biased. And to be honest, like if we return to the whole consultancy conversation, I was in the past, of course, also a traditional call it consultant. So you get into the companies and do your interviews. What happens, and maybe you can relate to that, usually your stakeholder says, talk to this person, that person, etc. And they also tell you quite a lot already about the organization. As a human being, you are biased and can already be in your questions. It already starts with whom you're talking to. Potentially, these are only the positive people. Happened with me in the past. And sometimes it's very hard to figure out what is really going on.
Yeah. No, but about that open door policy, it's quite funny that you said that, because it has been said to me in the past as well by previous people in different companies. And with one person, I could literally walk in and after 2 hours, I'm like, okay, I really should leave, But they never gave you that feeling that you have to leave. And then with other people that said that after 10 seconds, they just dropped the conversation. They're like, okay, we have said hi.
Yes.
How are you? And then you get this strong feeling like, now it's time to leave.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, but you told me that I'm always welcome.
Yeah.
So making somebody feel welcome, saying it or doing it, are two different things.
No, exactly. And that these are all also aspects of business culture, for instance.
Yeah.
And as an example, the connection also with, the topic I'm very fond of as well is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
And, only diversity won't bring you anything.
Yeah.
And that's my opinion. And a business culture does need to be inclusive to really add value. And what does that mean? That people can really bring themselves, their own selves, to work without any fear of repercussion, not fearing, what am I saying right now? Can I say this?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to jump in the diversity part, one of our investment partners, I was going through all the profiles and I was showing this to my wife, and I don't know why I did not notice it immediately, but she's like, they're all men and they're all gray hair and they're all white.
Exactly.
I was like, oh man, you're right. And then I'm like, okay, this is the board. What about the directors? All of them similar. Yeah. And then I gave that feedback to them. I said, actually, I'm very disappointed. Because you clearly can hire talent, pay for talent. Don't tell me there's no talent that is not fitting this box. Yeah. Clearly there is a boys club or whatever going on here. And then they did hire some diversified people from different backgrounds, but they did not give them the high positions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, I'm going to drop this topic, but I did highlight it, and it doesn't mean that if you hire an admin or something like this or somebody coordinator that you have solved the problem.
Exactly. And also when I hear these type of stories, but also even if it's, for instance, about C-level, I always have something like, okay, are they trying to hit, I would say, the statistics, the numbers, and do what they are required to do? Yeah. And I often see that as well as vanity metrics. And I want to know what a company is really doing for instance, for women, but it could be all, like if we talk about diversity, you also talk about a difference in age, for instance, or other minorities or different ethnicities. And then we come actually with a connection to, for instance, costs as well in an organization. So you can definitely say, I focus, for instance, on diversity and indeed hire these people. Yeah. But if you don't help them throughout in your organization, or if your business culture is not able to feel them appreciated and adding value, they will run away again. Yeah. And then your acquisition costs are super high, and you will also have problem to keep your talent. Yeah. And that's exhausting, also for your HR, for instance, but for the whole company.
Yeah, I saw some statistic on that. It's very expensive to hire people that leave. It's extremely expensive. Yeah. And So one of the things that I saw on the new campaign that is being launched from Predixa was that this nice graph from McKinsey where they show that for companies that invest during times, also hard times,
Yes.
that later they disproportionately benefited from it for having a higher revenue.
Correct.
So it makes economic sense to invest also in hard times. But why are people not focused on that, and why are companies only focused on cutting costs in times that revenue are dropping?
I think that sometimes they're lacking a certain innovation growth mindset, which is of course very easy now to say, and it's more like what is really required.
Yeah.
Yes, so a lot of companies I see are cutting costs because they have a very short, like, term mindset. So they're indeed so focused on now, and sometimes they don't have the ability or the insight in what's really happening in their companies. So again, that link to what is a root cause of certain issues, because I'm not against cutting, for instance, certain operational costs if you really know that you will be more efficient and also know the reason why you're spending a certain amount of money. What I do think, and that might be difficult for certain companies as well, is to have that longer term vision and actually also to look at costs way more holistically across the organization.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think there's also a little bit of an unknown amount of business cases or data in, let's say business schools and in general, so that a lot of leaders just think that that's the right way to act when there's tough times, to cut costs and not necessarily invest? Like, for example, just to give an example with the stock market, when the market is down, people always say you need to buy.
Yes.
So similar with companies, when the market is down, that's the time to invest.
Exactly. No, exactly. Yeah, it might be for certain business leaders. Maybe they are following too much theory, and it's also potentially the fear of making the wrong decisions. It also depends on the fact, like, where are those decisions based on? Because as you also know, most business leaders do want to have the proof that what they're doing is right, also for their investments. And also as an external advisor or someone, you can't say, like, I have a, how do you say that, a hunch that you need to do this and it's my feeling, and they just say, yeah, go away. Like, where is this based on? And I believe if you really are able to look at investments from a more innovative point of view, you're able to do the right things. And maybe let me explain it a little bit more. I think there are a couple of things that companies can do, and one of them is, for instance, to look at their core products and services and really innovate with those and ensure that they really represent what their customers want. And another one, and again, I am connecting it to workforce again, because I like that. I like that angle as well. If companies really look at innovative set of, say, the benefits package, and also look at their business culture and see what is really required to keep their top talents and to acquire top talents, they can innovate with that, and they can, but it requires another view. And the same goes with again, products and propositions that really value what their stakeholders want. But you need insights to do that.
So how is data-driven decision making, how ultimately would that help business leaders?
Well, if you really have the proper data you can trust on, you can make those decisions, and you can be innovative in all these ways that I just I gave some examples there. But I think in the past, it was also the case that business leaders only had a subset of data. And I think the ability to connect quantitative and qualitative data, so actually the hard and the soft data, as I would say, gives so many new dimensions, and it also gives depth and width in your results.
Yeah. And sometimes people are also biased, I think. At least if I look at myself, like a lot of times I thought things were the way they were until I really tried to analyze it and collect the data. And sometimes I was very surprised. I'm like, is that how things are? I thought it was different. But then, you're staring, you're rechecking everything. And you're like, oof, I cannot continue on that direction. Because otherwise I'm ignoring this very important information. And is it easy to collect data, qualitative data, for your company when you go into a consultancy job? Is it possible sometimes even?
Most of the times it is possible, because if we take a look at the qualitative data, it's predominantly internal data from employees. And for us, because it is, again, artificial intelligence, it doesn't matter how big the company is. I would say this becomes interesting with mid-sized and large companies. We can work with smaller ones as well, but it's the power of data, as you know. Because this data is also gathered anonymously, employees are also willing to provide that input as well. And depending on the companies, it can be easy or it can't be. It depends on like what they want to gather the data from their investors, for instance, their partners, their suppliers, and their own customers. We always say it's important to see all these different angles and also to give or to gather that external data. And in combination with their own KPIs, which actually can be hard sometimes. Definitely if companies are very silo-based, then it does mean that certain data comes from the entire organization. So for us, it's always good to have a certain contact person who is able to gather that data as well.
What if there's like a clear lack of data to be gathered? Is there a way how you can solve that, or?
What happened, like also recently, that you do see, if we talk about the harder data, so that's, for instance, financial data, the relative data I was talking about, that not always would a company have everything. And certain harder data are, for instance, also related to customers or to employees. Talk about, for instance, the Net Promoter Score. Not every company will capture that. So if they don't have it, we can't use it. Usually a company, specifically if they're mid-sized or larger companies, they will have a lot of KPI figures because they need to report on those as well. So that shouldn't be the issue. And if we talk about qualitative data, yes, we do need that sponsor, which is usually someone, CEO, a board member, who can convey the message to the employees that it's important to help them and to support them. And of course to make it very, very clear that it's anonymous as well. Usually our type of data gathering does get a high response rate compared to what you know as the traditional surveys, because this is not a traditional survey.
Okay, so the data is there. It's just you need to gather it. That's what I conclude out of this, and also being able to like trigger the right places to provide that data.
Yes, but that's usually also internally within a company, and of course we make it very clear from the start what we would require and also what we would require to ultimately like completely support the company. And it's clear that the more data they have also on the hard data side, the more connections we are also able to make.
Yes, I mean, I already can imagine how nice you will feel when you see the sets of data coming in, and it's a good, it's a good collection, and then you know that there will be a lot of good analysis that you can make, and it will be very supportive for you when you go into the conclusion of what can be recommended. So yeah, it's also a give and take. The people give something, the employees, and then they can take back because of the good advice that can come out of that.
Yeah, and I actually like that you trigger that point, because yes, it is about continuous improvement, incremental improvement, so step by step.
Yeah.
And so also what we do gather, imagine a big bucket of data.
Yeah.
Really a big bucket of data. That's why it is so important to go back to these original challenges and issues of that specific company, and indeed see what makes the most sense, and also which topics or areas they should focus on first. Because our advice will never be like focus on everything. It is important to, for instance, focus on maybe 2 aspects in the next period, depending on how big it is. And also, and that's where you triggered me as well, it's not always about where can you improve. It is also important in the whole continuous improvement methodology to celebrate successes. So it does mean that we are also coming up with elements which are actually very good in a company. And they can use that again also for their internal communication, and sometimes they do that for external communication as well. And our advice is for the rest also to inform their employees, what are we doing with the input?
Yeah, exactly. To let them trust you with the information.
Yes, but also we don't see this as a one-time exercise, because also to make adjustments and to continuously see if there are improvements, you need to do this regularly. And so you get internal benchmarks. In fact, the company gets their internal benchmarks.
So internal benchmarks, that's actually very interesting, because you can see quarter by quarter or year by year how people started with their progress and what happened afterwards, if they went upwards or downwards.
Exactly. And so where you would expect improvement is on the elements or parts of an organization where you would focus on based on an action plan. So actually the next time that they would measure again, we would expect to see some progress, but maybe we see other parts popping up that need focus as well. And again, it does depend on what they want to achieve and also what their real business challenges are. Because remember, in the end, we want to help them achieve sustainable growth.
Yeah, and perhaps also that surprisingly other parts started to improve as well.
Yes.
Although the focus was not put on that, but because people got in the right mindset,
exactly,
it accelerated.
Exactly.
No, I hear a lot of positive feedback from teams and people when the right consultants come in and trigger them. They actually get very excited because it makes them also get out of that routine and start to think like, what can we do better? How can we improve things?
It's often a very important part of business culture as well, and to feel noticed, to feel that you're bringing added value as an employee, no matter in which role or in which seniority you are. And what I also see is the younger generations, actually they also expect a lot, and they also expect that a lot of aspects are taken into account. They expect, and that is a bit also the sustainability part that you raised before, the diversity and inclusion part. They want organizations to have really clear values and also follow those values. And if that is not happening, they will leave almost immediately.
Yeah, which is a big contrast with before, where people just stayed for 25, 35 years with one company.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're a speaker at many events. You talk a lot about diversity, inclusion. Can you share more about that, and also how that journey started? Because yeah, I think it's quite interesting for the people to know more about that.
It didn't start with the diversity topic, to be very honest.
Yeah.
My speaking opportunities started during COVID and the beginning of COVID. And yeah, as you recall, a lot of things or everything was done online.
Yeah.
And somehow I got connected also with people doing all these conferences online. And I think certain people also read a little bit about my past, about my history in the Netherlands, the way I was able to maybe again think without a box or actually like escape a certain, I don't know, path or whatever. So they asked me to talk about personal resilience. And I did that a couple of times and found that people actually found it very interesting, but it was quite personal also, these stories.
Yeah.
And then slowly, because I was working already with Predixa as one of the co-founders, we were during that time quite focused on diversity, equity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And I do have a passion for that topic. And I do believe that there's much more to do than only being diverse.
Yeah.
But you need to be inclusive as a business, but also as a society. So
Yeah.
I see it way broader than only looking at companies.
Again, yeah, not the box, but outside of the box.
Yes. Yeah, but also look at Dubai, for instance.
Yeah.
We have so many different cultures here, so
True.
many people like representing different countries, etc. So I indeed started talking about that, and I've been asked to speak at multiple events, sometimes also with the angle of poetry. So in my spare time, I do write poems.
Yeah.
And for a while, I still do that, I include certain topics in my poetry. So again, sometimes people found out that I was writing about gender equality, women's empowerment, diversity, and then you start being asked for events and to speak there. But sometimes it can actually be a business event, but then they asked me to recite one of my poems. And then the networking was a little bit later, for instance.
Yeah.
So I still do that poetry. I don't talk too much about diversity, equity, and inclusion right now, not representing Predixa, because currently we are so focused on business resilience. And as I said earlier, I would bring and we will bring in the topic of culture and DEI, etc. But it's not the main direction right now.
Yeah. And, you know, perhaps later in life there will be more time spent on that, but it's great that you have built up that stage, and maybe you have made the path clear as well for others by starting to talk about it as one of the first people here in Dubai actively, and I think that's great, because you know, it's not so much about just talking about it. What I see, unfortunately, a lot of people do. I don't want to say names, but you know, I know you better, and I know that you also are doing it with a purpose to have also an impact, to make a change, to let something happen as well.
Yes, and I'm so glad you're bringing this up, because yes, I've been to events as well, where if you attend them regularly, you often see the same people talking about exactly the same topics. And yes, there's a lot of attention at that moment, but it's indeed, I always say, you're talking the talk, and a lot of people are talking the talk, but they're not actioning it. And I also I usually say walking the walk, and I know officially you would need to say walk the talk, but yeah. And yes, because otherwise it stays with just an event and another story. But what are we doing in businesses, and what are we doing also in society to really change things?
No, we actually at that moment you're diminishing also the value and the importance of it. By creating a story about it, you're also making it very superficial, because you just let people have some entertainment at that moment. But
yeah, it's sometimes it is more. I must say, like at these events, you do feel a type of support, like also in these bigger events, and at that moment you do see something in the audience, like yes, we're going to do something, and yes, we will change. Somehow when they leave that event again, I don't know, the moment is gone.
Yeah, no, I've done a lot of sustainability events, and I've seen horrific data and presentations about where the world is going. And it's not like they were not true; they were true. And then you think like we need to do something, and you hear that, you feel that vibe indeed. But then you come home and you're like, okay, let me go back into my routine. But there was also not asked to do something. There was no action plan in place, like what the government is doing now. For example, with the plastic bags, charging 25 fills. That was great, and some people told me already that should be done. In the Netherlands, they've been doing that for a while now.
Correct.
And now people say no to plastic bags more and more.
Yeah.
So, but it's action reaction, right? If people were not talking about it, the government would also not think, perhaps, that it was an issue.
Yeah. No, I think you have a point there, and that is, I think the link with businesses is also. Okay, it's also about where do businesses feel the pain. And currently, of course, it's tough with the challenging economic times. We do see where economies are heading towards. You can't blame businesses. Of course, they want to survive and they want to keep on growing, but it's not good to neglect certain aspects as well. But I think certain things sometimes need to be done first, whilst you do need to have a look at, again, your business culture, for instance.
A business culture doesn't necessarily have to cost much money to create a good business culture.
No.
The leaders that just sits down with the rest of the employees on the same tables, for example, the door that is open for everybody, and sometimes it can cost money. The owner of the company I work with gave the receptionist, the cleaning lady, $5,000 of his own shares, and the PRO 7,000 of his own shares.
Oh, really?
Yeah, during the event.
Okay.
But he was very happy with that.
Yeah.
So he's like, but it sets a culture as well.
Yeah.
That he wants to show that they are also appreciated and they are also equity owners of the company.
Yes.
And therefore, he wants to show to people, like even the people that cannot afford it but work hard will be also part shareholders. So there's so much you can do that can cost money or not cost money.
Yeah.
But
it's true, and it's sometimes also if they're doing I would say the wrong things. Then it's going to cost money.
Then it's going to cost serious money.
Yeah. And specifically in these times, because word travels fast. We all know the impact of social media as well. So of course, positive things are visible. But if there's a negative impact on your image, it is difficult and it's costly.
Oh yes, oh yeah, and it's always like the most talented people leave first, because they can get so quickly a job somewhere else. So when the culture goes wrong, you lose like those highly valued people the fastest.
As well, yes, no, absolutely. And as we were talking about, like certain generations also, they want different things. And I think all of us, or the majority of us during COVID, also realized, like, is this actually the path we want to take? Or are there other things more important to us?
Yeah, and now we're talking about that. You mentioned it earlier about your poetry. How were you able to show your inner thoughts and your feelings in poetry, and being able to share that, like you said, in business events or non-business events, and just to be able to put it on paper and to express yourself?
I think, okay, I've always been able to write, and long time ago back in the Netherlands I did write, but not so much poetry. I know that I did some things. Somehow I was triggered by a connection here, a lady from Syria, and she was actually one of the first people who asked me for a conference talking about personal resilience. I still remember we are in a WhatsApp group with a lot of predominantly females, and she asked at one moment, who knows people that write poetry, because I'm looking at organizing an event. And then I don't know what triggered me, but I replied like, oh, if you're looking for someone who's really professional, look at this and this person, because I met someone, but she's like a published author and like really there. And then I don't know why I said, but by the way, I write poetry as well. And she was, okay, can you send me something? So I sent her 2-3 poems, and she was like, you are in. And I had something like, I'm in what exactly? It was a poetry night. It was indeed during COVID. Not many people were allowed to gather. It was a little bit more open during that time. And I think I prepared 2 or 3 poems. There were other people, I think 1 or 2 who are already published authors, but also some people who did it for the first time. And I remember I was there kind of stage as well. I brought a few people that I know, and for the rest were a lot of Arabs there, a few Westerners, some Indians, like quite diverse. And I was there on stage and I was so nervous. I'm not so nervous with business, but I'm nervous with these personal things.
It's personal.
Yeah. So I know that I recited 2 or 3 poems. Probably my voice went a little bit up and down or whatever. And I came back to the table where I was sitting, and a professor of one of these universities here. I know him. I did an event, professional event with him, but this was the first time in this setting. And I remember he's very introverted. He was looking at me like, oh, I'm surprised, Kirsten. And I said, why are you surprised? You have so many feelings. And really something so like, sweet. And it was like he was indeed positively surprised that I from another culture, like was able to express those things. And after that evening, this Syrian lady actually said, I'm working on a book and I'm writing a story about COVID, or it takes place in COVID in this period. Can you write the poetry with it? And I was something like that. I've never done that before, but why not? And it was also a means to do something else, because you wanted to keep yourself busy. Of course, there was business, but we were also, as you know, remember, stuck at home for a long time.
We had suddenly more time.
Exactly. So that was a very long story, but indeed it started a bit like that. And then after that book got published, I was asked for other things. And then people found out I was indeed writing about certain topics they like the gender equality or cultural diversity. So last year I was invited to, it was Women's Emirati Day, 2021. So I recited a poem about that. This year it was a cultural diversity event, World Cultural Diversity Day, also with some government body present, some business people, different cultures, and there, yeah, you are again like on stage. And I think it helps me talking about things that are important to me. Mm-hmm. And yes, it does have a link with business sometimes, mm-hmm. but it's not my key thing. The only thing what often happens if you're invited to do something like this at a more business setting, of course it's nice to talk to the people as well and to talk about what you're doing in, I call it in my normal life, because this is still a hobby.
Wow, that's something, that's quite a story, and I love that response from that professor. Yeah. That was so sweet.
Yes, no, it was, and I was really
you
like...
You touched them.
Yes.
That's basically what you can see, and I mean, I guess you are very vulnerable when you're standing on stage and you write something that is from you, and you're giving that to other people. But the beautiful thing from that is that you can also touch people and reach people in ways that you normally can't.
Correct. The only thing which is sometimes difficult is, I believe in the freedom of writing, or writers' freedom.
Yes.
And that means that it doesn't mean that I've gone through certain things. Sometimes it is fiction, sometimes it's non-fiction, sometimes these are things I witness in people. And I have had it in the past as well, that people who know me saw certain posts on, for instance, Facebook or whatever, and they called me like, what the hell is going on? And are you okay? And then I was like, what do you mean? Yeah, you're writing about this and this. And I said, yeah, but it's not about me.
Yeah.
It's just how I see it, or that I see how vulnerable or how this impacts somebody close to me.
It was inspiration.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Often I say that.
Yeah.
Like it's writer's inspiration, writer's freedom, and don't take it all too literally.
Yeah, I understand that, and probably they still don't immediately think that's the case when you say that, but at least you trigger them also to contact you, and it's beautiful to see that you have that response on people. I wanted to ask you a final question, and that is, we talked a lot about your consulting expertise and your experience and your start, and your company Predixa, where you're co-founder with, and incredible value that your company can add to companies. Where do you see the consulting industry going in the long period of time, of the coming period of time, the direction that it's heading towards?
So if we talk purely about the consulting industry...
Challenges, the challenges that it might face.
Well, I do think if we look at traditional consulting, things need to change. And that is, of course, what we've been doing in the past, or right now are doing, because if you look at your clients or organizations, they want results right now. And with all these economic challenges, but also disruptions, they're faster and faster. There are a lot of changes, as we've all seen also in the past couple of years. So I think also the consulting sector needs to be more and more adaptive and really listen to their clients, be able to come up with, I would say, their advice and insights very fast. And okay, I'm not saying the next thing because we're not doing it, but I really think there's not too much value in it. I think the value of these huge, shiny, fancy reports, I'm not sure if there's a big added value still. Because also these reports, it takes a lot of time to write them. And as we see is that a lot of companies are, for instance, in trouble right now or do need to change things. And if you come up with insights maybe 2-3 months from now, because you're gathering your input right now, you're doing interviews or whatever, then I think truly the advice will be outdated.
Yeah.
It will be.
You'll be missing the point, perhaps.
Yeah. And with all these new developments, also technological developments are like faster and faster. I think elements like future of work as well, you need to take those into account.
I like that, and I hope that that we can move towards that direction as well. Because I think, you know, as a company, if you get a 30 or 50-page report, are you really going to go through that in details, or a couple of pages with the highlights and the things you can get, and then fastly shared with you?
Yeah, no, indeed, and to be honest, I'm talking also about my past experience. I was in the past also asked to provide my advice and by means of a report. And sometimes companies just ask that because they needed proof they're doing something. And then they were fine until the next like check or like audit. That's also not the way I want to work. You know, like it's writing for the sake of writing.
Yeah, you want to make an impact, you want to help them enable a positive change.
Exactly, no, exactly. And yes, I'm happy if I can see a company really improving.
Yeah.
And to see things in the news, for instance, yes, of course.
Fantastic. Kirsten Westholter was my guest. She is the head of Predixa Consulting. And thank you for watching. Kirsten, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your valuable insights and your story with me and us.
It was a big pleasure, and thanks again for inviting me.
It was my pleasure too.
Good.
Goodbye. Bye.